Was anyone else screaming, "No, Lucy!" at the telly? In the moment, Stephen forces Lucy to record the confession in Tell Me Lies Season 3. The show gives us many dark moments, and this was certainly one of them. I'm not sure what was worse, Stephen barking orders at her, making her repeat the same statements again or again, or a distraught, desperate Lucy following orders. From Lucy's perspective, this was all under the guise of protecting Bree. But was it really? Because out of all the things that Bree would want in this situation, I'm pretty sure this was not one of them. So let's break down what was actually going on in this scene, and why Lucy made the tape. So the narrative we are presented with is that Lucy was doing this to protect Bree. But I can't have been the only one thinking, just go sit down and talk to Bree and tell her what happened. At this point, Bree has no feelings for Evan. Yes, I know they get back together shortly after, but let's be honest, from the clips we've seen, it doesn't exactly look like sunshine and rainbows. Would Bree have been gutted if Lucy told her the truth? Absolutely. But would she have gotten over it? Honestly, I think she would have done. With Bree, it's the dishonesty she can't cope with. Lucy was worried about hurting Bree, and Bree was already struggling over the Oliver situation. But in reality, all she was doing was adding to the betrayal. She owed it to Bree to be honest with her, and let Bree decide what to do with that information. Lucy and Bree's relationship was very different in Season 1 to what it became in Season 3, and I think Bree would have taken that into account. If Lucy was not in her current state and had more time to think, then she may have acted differently. But in reality, I don't think that is the main reason she complied with Stephen's request. So let's break it down. Before we discuss the reasons why Lucy made the video, I do think it's important we talk about consent briefly here, as I think it's clear to see that this is not willing consent. This chapter will be short, but it will cover some dark themes, so there is a trigger warning here, and if you would like to avoid that, please skip to the next chapter. Tell Me Lies has not shied away from consent storylines, one of the most obvious being the situation with Pippa, but it also explores other issues, such as what happens when consent is taken away, or more subtly, when people do something they don't want to because they feel like they can't say no. This is clearly not a sexual act, but it's equally about power and control. Lucy, in most normal circumstances, would not have jumped on a bed and filmed a confession and willingly passed it over to an ex. At the time, she felt like she had no choice. We know she is fearful of Stephen, and she has every right to be scared of him. People can comply out of fear, desperation, trying to survive, and feeling like they have no choice. So I want to be clear, when I'm breaking down some of Lucy's decision-making process, that I completely understand that this was not consensual. As the viewers, we know she has a choice, but we were not Lucy in that moment, while she was in that emotional state in a room with a master manipulator. This show was set in the early noughties, Facebook was relatively new, consent, gaslighting, and toxic relationships were not as widely discussed. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, even for a moment, that this would not happen in present times. Can you imagine what Stephen could do now to Lucy with deepfakes and multiple social media platforms at his disposal? But unfortunately for Stephen, he wasn't quite as lucky. He had to make do with the resources he had. So let's look at why Stephen made the video in the first place. At the start of Season 3, Lucy was starting to heal, becoming more attached to her friends, more confident, happier. And he couldn't stand it. The rage was building over Evan and Lucy sleeping together, and it was eating away at him. When in reality, he had no right to be upset. This happened the night after he left Lucy hanging in a coconut bra while he walked out with Diana. But it wasn't just about this. It was about him starting to lose hold of the group, not just Lucy. Evan was trying to get back on a level playing field. Wrigley was no longer interested in playing his games, and was starting to see Stephen for who he really was. And Diana, she didn't want to be anywhere near him. And Lucy, when it came down to it, she picked Bree. Lucy and Bree's friendship would have caused Lucy to realise she was better off without Stephen. And I would argue Lucy herself was starting to realise it. When Stephen tried to isolate her and humiliate her at karaoke, his plan didn't work when Bree, like a true friend, got up there on that stage and saved her mate. Stephen knew as long as Lucy had Bree in her life, he would never have complete control, and he didn't want to lose one of his favourite toys. And if you think this seems far-fetched, the original Bold Tour of a platform had videos advising lonely incels on how to isolate their prey from their friends. And they do this because abusers know that to be able to have total control, they have to isolate their victims from their support network. Stephen, feeling like he was losing his power, decided to take this out on Lucy. How many takes of that recording did he make? He watched her in pure distress again and again whilst he made that video. How many people are that sadistic to do that? In fact, please don't tell me, I'm not 100% sure I want to know the answer to that. The scene is hard to watch. Stephen isn't just being his usual toxic self. He's managed to get himself to a point where he can be this blatant about wanting to hurt Lucy, and the whole time just knows she'll follow along. He no longer has to pretend he's a good guy anymore. This is Stephen letting his true colours show, and Lucy, who is starting to heal, goes right back to the start and complies with his demands. Stephen, underneath his icy exterior, was bubbling with anger in the events leading up to this moment, and takes the role of the sadistic, commanding director while Lucy records her own sabotage. But still, even that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to dangle it over her, saying he will release it when he wants to keep her living in fear. But not only that, to make it so that Lucy will keep begging him to give her the tape. We see him creating Facebook groups to put Lucy in the spotlight as much as possible, only to make her downfall that much darker. The time he spent orchestrating this plan is so incredibly alarming. He doesn't ever cool off, he just keeps toying with her. No wonder why so many women chose the bear. Lucy does have a track record of poor decisions, don't get me wrong. She's impulsive and she doesn't always think things through. I mean, she's a young woman in college and I'm sure everyone has made decisions they're not proud of. She sometimes does awful things with the right intentions, like trying to protect Pippa, not really realising the implications of the lie she just told. Lucy's decisions often come from trauma, insecurity and a deep belief that she deserves punishment. Part of that stems from her past, but also Stephen has amplified those feelings. Stephen was the first proper relationship she has, so she doesn't really fully understand what it means to be in a healthy relationship, which is why we see her replicating toxic patterns with the other guys that come into her life. Lucy's insecurity wasn't exactly a secret, and many others have pointed it out, even Wrigley when he was stating that Lucy isn't as strong as Diana. And this isn't blaming her at all. Diana was completely different to Lucy, but she still fell victim to Stephen after all. Stephen has a way of making Lucy feel bad about herself. So when Stephen pulls the camera and tells her to get on the bed, she complies, punishing herself for something she already feels guilty about. She thinks she's trying to protect Bree, but in reality, all she's doing is damaging Bree further. And we see it when she's getting deeper and deeper into the lie. When the Facebook group emerges and Pippa was in turmoil, Lucy didn't know what to do, so she just continues the lie with Bree, falling deeper and deeper into this situation. And for Lucy, can you imagine how mentally damaging that must have been to keep repeating Stephen's scripted statements again and again? It's enough to break most people. And what does she then go and do straight after the recording? She runs straight to Alex. To be fair, this isn't the first time that Lucy's wanted to be dominated in the bedroom, and everyone has their own kinks. No judgment at all, as long as it's consensual. But this wasn't about pleasure. The way she asked him to tell her she was nothing, it was clear that this scene was all about showing just how engulfed Lucy was by her own trauma. It didn't take Lucy long to go all the way back to the start. She was discovering that healing just isn't very linear. But what is interesting is Alex's past has given him an emotional awareness. He won't play the games Lucy is used to, which means she doesn't always know how to respond to him. She gets angry about the comments he makes at her, but in reality, it's because he's often right. He sees the darkness inside her, but he doesn't want to exploit it. He comes from trauma too. Now I'm sure the next few episodes will show us a bit more about Alex, but this scene does give us insight into how low she was feeling, how she thought she was a bad person and how she needed to be punished, and why she might have so willingly set up her own downfall. Yet unfortunately, I think there is another factor at play here too, and that is the fact that she knew if Stephen didn't have the recording, he would have nothing over her anymore. They were done, and so were the games. She would be cutting the final thread Stephen had over her. She would be free, and I don't think she was ready to be free yet. If we go back to the scene where Lucy even says to Evan, "I can't believe you told Stephen we slept together. He will never stop holding this over us." She knows how Stephen works. She knows he uses secret as leverage. If she told Bree, the leverage disappears. He wouldn't be able to manipulate her anymore, and maybe, just maybe, Lucy wasn't ready to let go of the game. Because with people like Stephen, the most disturbing thing that they do is not how they hurt people time and time again. It's how they convince people like Lucy that they can't live without them. So in reality, why Lucy got into the bed was quite complex. It's not just one thing. She wasn't just afraid of hurting Bree or cutting ties with Stephen. It was also that she thought so low of herself. She felt like she deserved to be punished. And that at that moment in time, she just didn't have any other options. She didn't have that space to think. Because Lucy's relationship with herself was complicated, she's drawn to chaos and intensity. And sometimes she chooses the path that hurts her most because it feels like the only one she deserves. In the end, the recording isn't about protecting Bree. It's about Lucy being trapped by Stephen, by her own insecurities, and by the version of herself she hasn't learnt to walk away from yet. So the real question we should be asking is, how is Lucy going to come back from this? So what do you guys think? Were there multiple factors at play? Was it really just about hurting Bree? Let me know your thoughts below. And as always, I'll see you next time.